Climate change is one of the biggest challenges we face today. It is already affecting people and nature across the globe, with developing countries being most impacted. There is an urgent need for investment to enable vulnerable communities and ecosystems to adapt to climate change. Yet funding is in short supply. The government of the Netherlands has committed to addressing this need by making 160 million euros available through the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development, known as the DFCD. Managed by a pioneering consortium of FMO, Climate Fund Managers, SNV and WWF, the DFCD will work with the private sector to catalyse over 500 million euros in additional funding for bankable projects across the world. These projects will boost the health of fresh water, forest, agricultural and ocean ecosystems, and improve water management. Critically, the DFCD will help vulnerable communities to adapt, drive sustainable development, and strengthen global efforts to tackle climate change. The fund is ready to build new partnerships. So join us in our mission to create a more resilient future.
Welcome, dear panelists, participants and organizers, to today's conversation on financing projects on climate for the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development. My name is Lian Poa. I'm the founder of Drinkable Rivers, and we raise awareness and create actions to a world with drinkable rivers. We run a citizen science project monitoring the water quality of the rivers worldwide, and we initiated the Bayers for a Drinkable Rivers network. I am today at the Worldwide Fund for Nature office in the Netherlands in service of the WorldStartup Collective, a global entrepreneurship platform supporting impact-driven startups and entrepreneurs like WWF. WorldStartup supports WWF with the selection of projects for the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development. The objective today for all of you is to inform you and mobilize those relevant projects eligible for the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development to apply. For that, we will touch upon some important aspects what the fund is all about today. We have over 800 attendees registered from all over the world. So good morning, good evening, good midnight, good afternoon. And more than 300 of you have indicated that you might be interested to apply with your project for the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development. We'll first hear from 4 panelists, which will be followed by an interactive panel discussion with all of us. Yes, I would like to first give the floor to Aaron.
All right, okay. Yes, good day everyone. My name is Aaron Vermeulen. I'm really excited about this launch of the opportunity window for the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development. We're sitting here in a nearly empty office in Zeist. It's very rainy Zeist in the Netherlands, but I think the launch of this opportunity window will shine a lot of light on the world, hopefully, and on you guys. And really looking forward to an interactive session and, more importantly, good ideas from the people dialing in or your partners across the globe. So looking forward to a great discussion today. Thanks.
And as we want to learn more about the fund, we'll actually come back to Aaron afterwards. But we first would like to give the floor to our first speaker, which is Aart Mulder. And he's the fund manager. He's the one responsible for the portfolio of the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development. And he's also from the FMO, the Dutch finance development company. Aart, can I invite you to open?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Aaron. I'm extremely excited to speak for this interesting audience of so many participants around the whole world. The Dutch Fund for Climate and Development, 160 million fund that was awarded last year by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs towards a consortium of SNV, and WWF, FMO as a development bank, and climate fund managers. And I think you already saw it in the video what a key focus of the fund is. But I think it's good to mention a couple of unique features of this new initiative. And if we would look at the next slide, then I can show these to you. First of all, I think the slide shows the key consortium partners, and Darren Aaron will tell more about the roles and how this 160 million euros is divided amongst the 4 partners. But the uniqueness of the fund is about 3 key things. First of all, these consortium partners try to develop projects for this climate fund in a so-called landscape. So SNV and WWF, the 2 NGO organizations, develop projects from a certain landscape, have grant funding available for external advice, and try to boost these projects towards a bankable and financeable solution. And they do that from a landscape perspective. It can be either that they have already defined a key ecological landscape in the world and establish a financeable project there, or it can also be the other way around, the so-called bottom-up approach, where we find very interesting projects that might be financeable from a climate perspective, but also try to work around a landscape approach around this specific project. And that's today is very important for that, because we try to find attractive projects and where we could look from a landscape perspective if this might be a very crucial project. So the consortium part is the development from a landscape perspective. That's the key thing. But the second key thing is to realize, to make these things really workable and successful, is to use so-called blended funding, meaning that you use partly grants and commercial funding and blend these all together. Now, I already provided the example of the grant funding available by these consortium partners, SNV and WWF, but also FMO as a development bank and climate fund managers are able to follow up on these projects that have been developed with a long-term finance solution, long-term debt, long-term equity, or any kind of other financial instrument. And these financial instruments bear also a certain kind of concessional element, meaning that there's a grant element provided in it to boost these projects. If we will not do that, then you come into the so-called value of death. What you often see is that very high risk, crucial projects do not materialize because on one hand, you do not have a kind of consortium approach with grant funding on the development stage. And on the other hand, you lack the risk appetite and a kind of grant element in the long-term finance solution. So that's also very crucial from this initiative. And the third thing I really would like to highlight is that this climate fund is focusing on adaptation. It's mentioned in the video. It's clear to you about adaptation. We can do have all kind of scientific stories about it, but it's actually adapting to the situation that the climate will change, protect ecological systems, but also protect people. But this adaptation is neglected in the world. The world felt too much guilty. We need to work on mitigation. And also, the second reason why it was neglected is it was too much linked towards the government. And this fund is tried to not only tackle adaptation, climate adaptation, which is already unique in itself, but also do that with the private sector. And it's fantastic to see so many people around the table today from all over the world that we can look, how can we find commercial projects that really target adaptation, resilience against climate change. And if we could look at the next slide, for instance, then we could see what we do we really want, because we talked about uniqueness, but what do we really want with this fund? And this is a kind of abstract picture, but I particularly left all the kind of numbers and figures because that might distract the key focus on this slide. The story about adaptation is that on an annual basis, we need 180 billion to tackle the challenges of addressing climate adaptation in the world. That's not a figure that we thought about. It's a figure that's actually comes from the Global Commission of Adaptation. 180 billion on an annual basis that will add up to 1.8 trillion in 2030. 10 years, 180 billion. I get emotional if I talk about the thing, because what we try to achieve here is that to tackle this huge market for adaptation. Currently, there's only around 34 billion invested in adaptation in the world. So there's a gap of $146 billion annually on an annual basis. And three key sectors need to be addressed there. We need to invest in three key sectors, and these are the three circles you see around it. All of the parts of the circles have around 25 to 35% of the total need in climate adaptation finance. The first circle is related to land, everything related to land use. That can be sustainable forestry, sustainable agriculture, but also general environmental protection projects for
Art, just to let you know that, can you round off?
Yes, thank you very much. It's very helpful. Thanks. So that's the land use base. The second part of the circle is related to water, anything related to water, oceans, but also water, wastewater treatment, drinkable water. And third circle is related to disaster risk management. So everything related to typhoons, to floods, etc. And what can we do about it via early protection systems, risk insurance products, etc. So this is what we try to target, these three factors. And if I show the last slide, just to give one picture for you as a kind of inspiration. And this is a sweet spot example, protecting mangroves in the world, in particular in the poorest countries in the world. These mangroves create such a biodiversity under the surface, but also above the surface. They provide medicine, but they also protect people and other parts of the landscape via all kinds of natural disasters like floods. So if we can find a commercial case in these kind of mangrove landscapes or peatlands or any other crucial landscapes, that would be fantastic. And I'm looking forward to see all these business cases later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Art. Thank you, Art. And we'd like to continue to learn a bit more about the fund. And I give the floor to our host, Aaron Vermeulen, who's the director of the Green Finance Unit of WWF. Aaron, floor is yours.
Thanks, Leanne. And so while Art introduced the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development and our objectives a little bit more, I'll guide you a little bit more into the opportunity window itself. So can you show the next slide, please? So what the next slide tries to explain is we have three facilities in the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development. We have an origination facility, which is really the project motor. That's how I normally explain it to external audience. Which is deploying around 30 million grants to identify potential investable projects and companies and bring them to investability. And then by the time they are investment ready, we will pass them on either to the water facility or the land use facility. Within the DFCD, we have identified 4 investment themes. One is climate resilient water systems and freshwater ecosystems. The second one is around forestry. Then the third investment theme is on agriculture, as climate smart agriculture. And the last one is around protecting the environment and nature-based solutions. Then this is just a very brief example to show you what we're actually looking for. This is a project in Kalimantan in Indonesia. It's a joint venture called Royal Lestari Utama, who bought a concession of around 80,000 hectares to grow sustainable rubber. What we really like about this project is that on one hand it's providing income to around 60,000 workers in these rubber plantations. It's providing secondary income for local communities, but it's also setting aside 2/3 of the area for conservation objectives and local community income generating projects. In the slides after this, I will guide you through a couple of criteria of projects which we're looking for. So very importantly, this is a private sector fund for climate adaptation and mitigation type of projects. So we are really looking to receive proposals from parties that either are private sector companies or are in touch with private sector companies with ideas that align with the criteria of DFCD. And then the other criteria that I want to highlight is the commercial viability of the project that you need to have in mind. So the origination facility is really put in place to bring good ideas to bankability, to commercial viability, but already the good idea that the proponent has should have an idea on what is the ticket size. And we generally are looking for ticket sizes of 5 million and above. And we also we can only support projects with a clear revenue model behind it. So please think about, okay, how is this project going to get income to pay back the loan or the equity positions in that particular company or project. And then the DFCD as a whole has a whole range of assessment criteria. So we are only looking at low and middle income countries. We are only looking at projects that meet the Rio Market II system for climate mitigation and adaptation. We only support projects that have a positive impact on local vulnerable groups that are being impacted by climate change. The ideas coming from the private sector partners need to be aligned with the national determined contributions, so the national climate plans on the ground. And as I said, they need to be commercially viable, and they should be additional to the existing finance system in these countries. To give you a little bit more of inspiration what we have in mind in terms of projects, I refer you to this blueprint guide, which is downloadable from the WF website. We have an application process which I won't guide you through now because of lack of time, but you will start with a very simple intake form that then we will assess, and then we will get in touch with you to populate more detailed information to us. By the time you've passed stage 3, we will definitely put you in touch with our local offices to also seek their advice and approval. Yeah? This is our origination facility stage gate process. So what you see, stage 0 is the opportunity window with the intake form. Then we have a stage 1, which is a high-level business plan, which has some qualitative ideas around the business case and the climate impact. We generally will provide grants up to 40,000. We expect this stage to take between 3 and 6 months. And both non-profit and for-profit organizations can apply. Then stage 2 is the full business development plan. We can only provide that grant to private companies. That stage can take up to 1 year. But we also expect co-financing from the private sector company in this stage. And then stage 3 is the investment stage. And it's lastly, I would like to highlight that proponents can also go directly to stage 1, directly to stage 2, or directly to investment level. Yeah?
It's all about creating life, I think. This is as a living model with different stages. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Aart. For introducing us to the fund, we'll go to our next speaker, Nachilala Nkombo. She's the Chief Executive Officer of WWF in Zambia. Very welcome. And she will take us deeper into what was briefly touched upon, this landscape approach. What does this mean and how do cases come together in a landscape? Nachilala, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and it's a great pleasure for WWF Zambia to have an opportunity to share perspectives and its experience so far around the implementation of the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development. I just want to say that in Zambia, WWF and SNV are driving the process to identify potential bankable projects. And since we launched this year nationally, we've identified more than 22 potential projects at different stages of assessment. Just to say that the program on DFCD is building on over 50 years of experience WWF has in Zambia, and in particular basins and landscapes that DFCD focuses on. Through this period of time, we have been consistently monitoring environmental risks and also have been monitoring the impact of nature loss as well as climate change. So relevant to this discussion is the work that we've done to provide technical advice to government, to private sector developers of projects in the mining and energy sectors, as well as communities around potential environmental impact assessments. Last year, we gave advice to government around a potential project to build a hydropower dam on Luangwa River within the Zambezi catchment, and luckily the government heeded our advice and have decided to take that project elsewhere. As WWF, over this span of time, we've been involved in supporting the Department of National Park in Zambia in terms of the investments required to restock and protect some of Zambia's iconic wildlife species that are a key part of the tourism economy in Zambia. Lastly, but not the least, we've also provided support, technical advice in terms of strengthening water governance, both to the private sector and to the public sector, as well as strengthening the capacity of communities to run citizen science or water quality monitoring projects. This year, we launched the Green Bankables project, which is supported by the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development. So the challenge and opportunity of DFCD in Zambia is really focused on two key challenges: nature loss and climate change. As a country and also the Kafue landscape, where our main projects are focused on, have faced nature loss in the form of land, forest, and water basin degradation. These have contributed to energy, food, and water insecurities in the landscape and in the country, which in themselves have created opportunities for DFCD type projects. The challenges that we face have been exacerbated by climate impacts and now the COVID impacts. And so these have contributed to economic decline. And also, according to the United Nations, the cost of climate change, the Zambian economy in the last 10 years have been to the tune of $4 billion. And so this situation puts our achievement of SDGs under threat and also provides an opportunity for us to think strongly in terms of sustainability to deliver the SDGs. So it gives a great opportunity for us to develop a whole pipeline at the landscape level of green bankable projects. So as you may be aware, from the conservation community side globally, our annual investment to protect the world's most important biodiversity assets is about $52 billion. That's way much less than what is needed to ensure protection and sustainable use. We have a gap that ranges between 300 and 400 billion a year. And for us as WWF, it makes sense to partner with consortium partners such as FMO and climate fund managers and others to try and see how the investment communities could come in and work with us to deliver green bankable projects in landscapes that are threatened. So the themes that our 22 plus projects have focused on are around building climate resilience agriculture, resilient water systems, protecting key biodiversity assets that support the economy, and also promoting sustainable forestry. So just to give an illustration, we have noticed through our experience that a single intervention for conservation or sustainable development is not as effective. So as WWF, we deliver our mission in Zambia in a number of landscape through what we refer to as the landscape approach. In delivering our mission, we elevate the value of natural capital in terms of supporting the economy. We also engage private sector and public sector to ensure that we are driving towards more sustainable use of natural resources. So what do we mean by a landscape approach? So we look at a whole ecosystem or ecological landscape, and we consider the shared value that it delivers to various sectors in the economy. We also consider the risks that affect all these different industries in there, and we drive discussions around action that's needed at a collective level and at an individual level to either mitigate risks such as climate change or also risks that relate to things as basic as pollution. And we drive in this particular direction with the hope of delivering integrated management of natural resources, ensuring that private sector partners that we're working with can also achieve profitability while driving sustainability. And to the development challenges I raised earlier, through the DFCD, we can deliver nature-based solutions to enterprise and development challenges that we are facing. So this landscape of the Kafue Flats, we focus on it because it's the economic engine of Zambia, providing 90% of the country's hydropower. It's responsible for the large part of our agriculture sector, and it's also a very important landscape in terms of biodiversity in the country, but it faces a lot of pressure. So now, just to bring it home in terms of the risks that this landscape faces from the different industries or companies that are operating in the area, all these companies from hydropower generation to agriculture to fisheries do face reduced volumes of water. The main resource that we focus here is what is happening to the water situation and the water security. We also monitor the risk related to pollution, particularly industrial pollution, because there are so many industries that depend on this water resource. But then also we have to deal with the extremes of floods and droughts that come as a result of climate change from time to time. So again, to be successful within this landscape, when we're looking at a water risk filter, you see that the color that is brighter shows a higher level of risk, and is also related to parts of the landscape where hydropower dams have been allocated. And it is the hydropower dams that draw the most water or abstract the most water, creating an unhealthy competition to other sectors. So part of what we do as WWF is to play the convening role, bring private sector at the table with government and regulators to have a healthy dialogue in terms of how the basin and the river can be managed more efficiently and more equitably. Next slide.
Nachilala, can you round off?
Okay, so the key partners that are working together in these landscapes, as I mentioned, includes ourselves and several companies to really make sure that the landscape does not collapse, and there is accountability regarding actions the individual companies are taking to move towards sustainable use of water, but there's also collective investment that is put around to make sure that the basin can continue providing the essential ecological services that it provides us that keeps these businesses running. Next slide. So as mentioned before, we partner around transparency on water information, around more responsible utilization of water, and then also mobilization of investments to better manage the landscapes. So when you look at the next slides, it's an example of what I refer to as the 22 potential bankable projects that fall into two categories. One that are focused on nature-based solution where an ecosystem is providing direct services to the economy. I'll just speak about one example, a project that's worth $10 million to protect the Lukanga swamp, which is part of the Kafue system. So this swamp plays a critical role in terms of ensuring that water flows for hydropower generation and for water supply across the country. But it faces the threats of climate change, over abstraction of water, and environmental degradation. And through DFCD, we feel that we can a more sustainable response can be generated out of this. We have other projects in our pipeline around ecological and sustainable farming, where we're working with ABI to ensure that its network of smallholder farmers, they partner with, they change their production practices to look at how they improve the management of soil, the management of groundwater, as well as how they are managing their waste. Next slide. So perhaps to conclude, from our experience so far, it is very clear that biodiversity loss and climate change are shared risks that cannot be dealt with by one business. So consultation and a landscape approach is very vital for the collective success. We've also noted that it's actually possible to align sustainability and profitability. It is at the peril of the businesses in this landscape if they ignore biodiversity loss, because we see biodiversity loss as a direct business risk. Thirdly, we see the future because of the high rates of nature loss and also the big impacts of climate change. We see the future as green. So we are working very hard to build a pipeline of specific bankable projects that will be the basis of future investment and development. And lastly, but not the least, success of these projects requires an enabling environment to deal with it, with the constraints. So we're very excited about the possibilities and the opportunities that DFCD provides for transformation and large-scale conservation and protection of nature in Zambia. Thank you.
Thank you, Nachilala. Very exciting indeed, and so good to see the shared value coming back in the landscape. I trust that there's a lot of interesting questions coming up in the Q&A box, just to remind people. And also, when I give the floor to Patrick, because we would like to keep the time also for the interactive part, could you keep an eye on the chat box, Patrick? So our next speaker is the CEO of the new forest company, Patrick Mujenji, and he is now ready to talk, I think, all the way in Uganda. Patrick, okay, here's yours.
Great, thank you very much, Leanne. Thank you to all the panelists and participants. A warm good afternoon from East Africa. I'll talk a little bit about the New Forest Company for context. What you should be able to see on your slide right now is a brief synopsis of who we are. Very briefly, we are a 16-year-old forestry business, plantation business that is active in 3 countries in East Africa. We're active in Rwanda, we're active in Tanzania, and we have operations in Uganda as well, where our story started. For context, we are sitting on about 40,000 hectares collectively, of which 23,000 is planted, with primarily pine and eucalyptus. The split between the 2 species is about 50-50 at this stage. Our work impacts directly communities around us, numbering about 500,000 people. And our approach to our business is seen through 3 lenses that will come through my opening remarks here. The very first one is obviously the commercial one. Do we have a commercial proposition that is viable? And can we return an increasing, can we offer an increasing return to our stakeholders? The second one is conservation. We are very, very committed to the conservation. It's embedded in our business ethos. As an example of that, we are sitting on at least 30% of all our plantations as conservation areas. We guard those jealously, and that does not include land that is earmarked for future planting. The third lens that we apply to our work as a private company is community. Community, community, community. Critical to our impact that we offer the host communities, and critical for the long-term sustainability of the work that we do. We'll talk a little bit about that going forward. We are active participants on the New Generations Plantations platform, and very proud to be partnering with WWF in the work that we do. What I'd like to do next is talk about our outgrowers. So as a private commercial forestry company, we started out establishing our plantations. We consequently reached out to the communities around us, and over time have grown from purely seeking a social license to operate to a point where we're building agency with the communities. They're able to develop, design, and grow projects that they feel are critical for them. We support them in that work. And where we're heading to is very exciting, where we are securing the future by determining future revenues that they can earn through the smallholder woodlots that they have planted, and offering commitments on pricing for their projected harvests. So this has been a learning process for us. And just to say that we are continuously working towards getting to a better place of sustainability. Where DFCD comes in is going to be quite evident on this next slide, where we came into the conversation with them with a clear understanding that as a private business, we generate revenues through 2 primary sources. The first is a pole plant, which exists in all of our operating entities, from which we serve the energy sector. The second is our sawmills, from which we generate revenues coming up with all sorts of timber products, a growing list of products that we are constantly working on and developing. The opportunity we have now with the grant that we are receiving from DFCD is to develop a third and critical component and revenue stream by developing the technical capability to drive carbon certification that is not only limited to our plantations, but also incorporates our conservation area and, very importantly, our outgrowers that I spoke about a bit earlier. This work is going to be critical in making us viable, in making a commercial proposition to our community around us a lot more attractive, and crucially, in helping them keep the trees planted in the ground to maturity. One of the things we are witnessing is that because of the pressures of life, that is not always the case, but with this kind of funding, we're able to unlock that value across the chain. And the last thing I'd like to do in these opening remarks is talk about the 5 expected outcomes that we see as a direct result of our partnership with the DFCD. The very first one you'll see on your slide right now speaks to landscape stewardship. This idea that together with the community, we will be able to better steward the landscape that we are responsible for. The Ugandan story is a particularly sad one. 55 years ago, we're sitting on about 50% forest cover as an example. Today, you'll be lucky to get the number 15%. How do we begin to reverse that trend? How do we make this viable, not just for plantation companies, but also for the communities that are beginning to take up plantation forestry in small woodlots all over the country? Capacity building is the second one. Our capacity is being built. I touched on this earlier. I'll not belabor the point. And simply growing the catchment area in terms of accurately listing what size of plantations we have, what size of plantations are sitting without growers, and determining the size of the carbon sink that we have. How do we work to monetize that to make our work sustainable going forward? The DFCD support is crucial in helping us determine that. The third one is replanting. I couldn't say enough about that. It is not possible to be a meaningful forestry company if you're not replanting. The realities of the business are that there is a significant cash crunch that we are constantly managing, and any support we are able to receive is helpful in freeing up resources to manage short-term challenges of the business while ensuring a more sustainable future in the medium to long term. The fourth thing is remote sensing, which is purely data-driven approach to our decision-making. And the last thing I'll touch on is carbon certification. For us to be able to participate actively in the carbon finance, to generate carbon finance, participate in the carbon market is a very important aspect of ensuring not only business survival, but sustainability into the medium and long term. With that, I'll turn it back to you, Leanne, and for further management of the meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Patrick. It's so exciting to hear your project, you are in line of receiving help from DFCD. So it was very useful to get so not only the shared value in a landscape, but also in a community you emphasized. Thank you. So thank you all panelists for introducing, and we'll now go to the interactive part. We look at the questions that have come in, and the first question that we'd like to ask Aart is, can you share with us, we just heard Patrick, can you share with us some other examples of projects that are in the process of being funded?
Yeah, thank you very much. Of course, I can. It's quite a broad area of adaptation, even also sometimes possible to do mitigation projects. I can share an example from Asia, in Bangladesh. We are currently working on a project that's targeting actually sustainable shrimp farming for small-scale farmers in the area in the delta of Bangladesh, the Bankable delta. And the striking part of that is actually that we try by providing a solution of a processing plant for sustainable shrimp. There's also a mechanism, a commercial business case to help all the small farmers by establishing their own business, by building sustainable ponds for the shrimps, by helping them using the right inputs and also using the right things not to harm the environment. Also indirectly benefiting the environment, including the mangroves we briefly talked about. So this is an example where I built on a business case, in this case sustainable shrimp, but at the same time have a kind of good system with outgrowers schedule for sustainable farming, and at the same time protecting the environment, which is very crucial in such a delta. I can also mention other examples if you like, Lian, or if you would like to go to the next question.
This is good that we got an example from Asia this time, and I'd like to have a next question to Aaron. Can you clarify your remark on the 5 million and the timeline? There has been a lot of questions in the Q&A box.
Okay, yeah, this 5 million keeps chasing me, right? But
and now again today.
So what we're trying to do in the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development is really changing the finance sector and redirect financial flows from unsustainable practices to sustainable practices that help local communities and mitigate climate change, right? And so the 5 million ticket size is the average size of the project or the investment that we're looking for, in order also to inspire the financial sector to do more of that. So we don't claim that we're going to change the world with this 160 million only. We are developing examples and blueprints to actually do that. So that's the 5 million about. We're ready to, if you guys have a great project with a very nice impact side, we can make exceptions occasionally, so go below that. But generally, that's the minimum ticket size that we're looking for. So on the timeline, the timelines I indicated are the timelines that we have in mind for preparing for this investment, right? So in stage 1, we're providing a grant of 40,000 euros, a timeline of 3 to 6 months. Stage 2 is the full business plan development, 300K maximum grant, and then a timeline between 6 and 12 months as well. And then for the full business development, we expect co-financing from the private sector partner that can include in-kind contribution, that can include pre-investments that have been made prior to submission of the proposal.
And this timeline, it's not because there's more than finance that the DFCD offers. Is that correct?
So so the origination facility offers support to local companies, and these are the timelines I indicated are to actually do that. By the time the proposals are ready for investment, then of course the project goes into implementation. So the company receives a loan or it receives equity stakes, and with that money the company is able to implement the project, to scale up the agricultural farm or to build a factory. I
mean also, do they get other kind of value from the DFCD
in terms
support?
Of knowledge?
Yeah.
Well, we have consultants, we have World Startup Collective who is ready to help. So if they want to spend a part of that money to get that support, they're most welcome to do so. But that's up to the grantee. So that's up to the party that receives the money to actually decide what type of support they need.
Yeah, I believe Aart, you wanted to add something as well?
I think that also, Lian, you were referring to, I think the crucial role, how I see also the role, for instance, from WWF and SNV, is the extreme local expertise they have in all these countries with their own knowledge, with their own specialism they use for boosting a project, not only from a financial perspective, but also from an environmental perspective related to WWF, and from a social perspective if we talk about SNV. So we have actually both the community social side and the environmental side perfectly on board with own local knowledge to help a project develop in the right direction.
So of course we will work with the local company in that country to develop the project further. Yeah. So that's the type of support.
Yeah, great. And what kind of projects are you excited about?
Well, I'm excited about projects that attract private finance to adaptation projects. There's a lot of finance already going to climate mitigation, so greenhouse gas type of projects. But if we can identify big projects that service hundreds of thousands of local communities, hedging them against droughts and floods, and hedging them against climate change, I would be really excited about that.
Great. Natchilala, I would like to ask a question to you, and maybe Aart would like to support in case you'd like to have any addition. Because what kind of projects that have a great potential but are currently often overlooked by funders? Natchilala, can you maybe share some of your experiences? This actually came also from the participants' discussion.
Okay, great. So I think some of the projects that have a great potential that are overlooked by funders are those perhaps that relate to the conversion of waste to energy. As you know, energy, there's a big energy deficit across the African continent, including my country, but there's a lot of waste that's coming from industry that has not been looked at. So I think the potential for a win-win situation where an environmental solution is found that is long-term and sustainable, but also a critical need is met in terms of energy to drive industry. Another type of project that's sometimes overlooked by funders, and partly I don't blame them, maybe because of the structures not being strong, and which is what makes the New Forest Company very exciting, are projects around the development of non-timber forest products such as honey. I think as many of you of the audience may be aware, Zambian economy is dependent on copper, and copper has had lots of negative impacts on the environment. So in the year 2015, a ton of honey coming from forest projects were fetching more on the international market than a ton of copper. And I think this is where investors need to look at in terms of how can we marry both sustainability as well as profitability without damaging the environment. So I think in a lot of landscapes, projects that are looking at large scale development of honey production, I think, or even forest management, honey production being one byproduct and several byproducts there. Yeah.
Thank you. And Art, you want to add something?
I think it's really interesting what you mentioned, Sheila. And I think to come back on these two things you mentioned, if we look at waste to energy projects, we are already working and looking at projects in Thailand and in South Africa on waste to energy. It's more on the mitigation and on the adaptation side, but at the same time, some of them also have adaptation links. So that's clearly on the focus, and particularly also because of the large avoidance of greenhouse gases by these kind of projects as well. The second one, non-timber forest products, is also, I think, very, very interesting. The challenge there is to find a financeable, viable solution, but in combination with other projects or link it towards regular forestry, I think the case can be made, and this is definitely part of our sweet spot project. So happy that you mentioned that. Thank you.
For that addition. Then I have a question to Patrick. I'd like to hear a little bit of the story, how you heard about the DFCD, and can you tell the story about what your experience so far has been, the value, the excitement? I know you're in line, so it's still exciting. So can you tell a little bit, because I think a lot of projects, potential projects who are also listening, might learn a lot from where you are at now.
No, thank you very much, Leanne. And this is where the value of partnerships comes in. We've been a part of the NGP platform, New Generation Plantations, for a while now. And that partnership has been critical in getting the introduction to DFCD, who we applied to. And the process has been a very clean process from my perspective. As a forestry company, Impact Office has been very crucial in ensuring that we meet the requirements that all people applying should meet. And it's been a very participatory process. We've been heard, we've been able to be advised, and it's really gratifying to get to a point where we're actually successful in receiving what I hope is our initial funding to get this going, and we're looking forward to a very long-term partnership. What Art says is music to my ears. Obviously, being in the forestry business, those are all areas that we're very, very active in, whether it's timber products, whether it's converting waste to energy. It's speaking right to the heart of our commercial proposition. So the process was through an introduction. The engagement with DFCD has been very professional, very supportive, where I've found the DFCD team to be very responsive. When I speak to our impact team, they've been very encouraged by what the process has been like. It's not been daunting, and I would encourage anybody who's considering applying to actually go out and do so. I think the process itself is very educative, and I wish you the very best, that the outcome would be positive for you as well.
And do you have maybe a key learning of where you thought, that it would have saved time, or do you have a key learning that you'd like to reveal to us?
I think from my experience is flexibility. One of the things I spoke to in my opening remarks was we had an approach, and diversification of timber is very, very, very much at the heart of our next 5-year plans. Those did not quite sit aligned with current priorities at DFCD. So we're able to be a bit flexible and say, okay, fine, what else can we work on together? So if there's one thing I'll pull out is be flexible, have an idea where you want to end up, but be flexible. And I think you'll find in DFCD very willing partners and people who will help you and guide you along the way.
Great, thanks. Yeah, we'll meander a bit, be flexible. I have a question to Art and or Aaron. Or this comes also from the audience. What steps are taking to ensure the funds are being used efficiently and not wasted?
Well, I think our stage gate process is one of the approach we apply. So we do proper due diligence before we submit the grants to companies. As you see, we start with a small grant to test the viability, and only if the company shows that it's actually viable and potentially investable, we will scale up the grant. We also have an internal process, so before you actually receive the 300K grant or less, there's an internal investment committee with all the 4 consortium partners looking at the business case. So it's not only WF or SNV who will decide about the larger amounts, but that we will also ask the potential investors to actually look at it and say, this is potentially we're going to invest in. And if not, we will not provide the grant.
Yeah, okay, so it sounds very thorough. Art, need to add anything, or is...
Yeah, I think that it's a very relevant question. I think to add on what Aaron said is also the additional value of the consortium partners. I think if we look from an FMO perspective, our weakness is that we are often on a distance. We do not have a large local network. So, but our advantage is that we are a very efficient banking organization. The other way around for the NGOs, I think, or for WWF and SFV, they are maybe not used for large, efficient transactions to work on and make financeable, but they do have the local knowledge and the knowledge on the ground, on the landscapes, and picking really the right projects. So if you combine these together, then you actually make already an efficiency gain, and that's why I'm very excited about this concept of the consortium itself.
Yeah, so it's a symbiosis, the mycelium that WWF supplies in the trees that the FMO. So one last sentence to from all the panelists. If you can envision how, from your perspective, the landscape in 10 years' time, so how does the financial landscape, or how does the landscape look like? How would it be if in just one sentence? Let me start with Patrick.
I envision a very sustainable future with a doubling of our current forestry assets driven primarily by outgrowers.
Okay, so my vision for the landscape is where we really have thriving green businesses that have been supported and catalyzed by DFCD. As WWF, we're really looking forward to creating a whole generation of green SMEs who could be part of this. So right now, they are not accessing this fund, but through the relationships with the large companies, we see that happening. So we see that we are very excited because we have not been putting the correct value on what's
The sentence was powerful. Art, your one sentence, how does the world in 10 years' time look like from your perspective?
It would be fantastic if in 10 years' time, actually, this fund is not needed anymore. And that we have achieved a situation where we have mobilized billions of funding for these initiatives. And that's just automatically that every investment will involve a certain adaptation angle in the world.
Stage 5, everybody knows how to find each other as a living model. So Aaron, then the last to you.
All right. Okay, so my vision is, while at the moment we have an abundance of capital, but a lack of good sustainable projects, I hope in 10 years' time it's the other way around, that we have abundant good investable projects, but not enough capital to actually to fund them, right? Or enough?
Well, great. So, and I would include then the drinkable rivers flowing through these, at least at some part yet in 10 years' time. So we come towards the end. Thank you, dear panelists. Thank you, participants. And thank you, organizers. There's a whole team behind. To emphasize, this is a global fund. It's not just Africa, like we heard. It's also in Asia, and also next time there will be an event, also with a little bit of focus of Latin America, but it will be a Q&A session on 8th of December at 3 o'clock at Central European Time. For today, we'll share the recording of the event and answers to the questions that were not raised here or replied in the chat box. Well, thank you. And I think the number of all of you participating today already shows this is relevant. So there's an urgency, and let's find each other to make our shared value.
Leanne, and thanks a lot to the panelists. Thanks to the hundreds of participants. And now it's time for action. So please have a look at the link on the screen and submit your ideas. And I'm really looking forward to get in touch with you and discuss potentially aligned ideas for DFCD. Thank you again.